The morning sky over Seoul was clear and bright until the shadow fell across the city. Office workers stopped on busy streets and looked up at something that should not have been there. Children pointed from school playgrounds while their teachers pulled them inside. Traffic came to a complete stop as drivers got out of their cars to stare at the impossible sight above them. A massive ship hung in the air like a dark mountain floating in the sky. It was bigger than any building in the city, and shaped like a giant blade with sharp edges that caught the sunlight. The ship made no sound, but everyone could feel something heavy pressing down on them like the air before a terrible storm. Kim Soo was having his morning coffee when his phone started buzzing with emergency alerts. He was the president of South Korea, and he had dealt with many crises before, but nothing like this. His security team rushed him to the underground bunker. While news reporters on every channel tried to explain what was happening, the ship had appeared without warning. No radar had detected it, no satellites had seen it coming. It was simply there one moment when it had not been there the moment before. Scientists around the world were frantically trying to understand how such a thing was possible. Dr. Park Min was one of those scientists. She worked at Seoul National University studying space and had always wondered if humans were alone in the universe. Now she had her answer, and she was terrified. She watched the ship through her telescope and saw details that made her hands shake. The metal was unlike anything on Earth. Strange symbols covered its surface that seemed to move when she looked at them too long. The ship stayed perfectly still for 3 hours. People gathered in the streets below despite government warnings to stay indoors. Some prayed while others took pictures with their phones. News crews set up cameras in every part of the city. The whole world was watching Seoul. Then something changed. A smaller craft separated from the main ship and began to descend. It was still huge, but shaped differently, like a bird of prey with wings spread wide. As it came closer, people could see lights pulsing along its surface in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The craft landed in the large plaza in front of the National Assembly building. The ground shook when it touched down, and windows in nearby buildings cracked from the impact. Steam rose from the metal hull as if it was burning hot. Romp extended from the side of the craft with a sound like metal screaming. The crowd that had gathered was pushed back by police and military soldiers, but everyone could see what emerged from the ship. They were not human. The first being to step out was tall and moved with the grace of a predator. Its skin was covered in blue scales that shifted color in the light. It had 4 arms instead of 2, and each hand ended in claws that looked sharp enough to cut through steel. Its head was elongated with large eyes that seemed to look in all directions at once. More beings followed the first one. They were all different sizes, but shared the same basic features. The scales, the claws, the strange way they moved, like they were always ready to fight. Some carried weapons that glowed with energy. Others wore armor that seemed to be made of the same metal as their ship. The first being raised one of its 4 arms and spoke in a voice that was amplified somehow so that everyone in the plaza could hear clearly. The words were not in any human language, but somehow everyone understood them. The meaning appeared in their minds like thoughts that were not their own. I am Ambassador Crix of the Volan Empire. Your species has been discovered and evaluated. You are weak creatures living on a small world that has resources we require. The crowd murmured in fear and confusion. Some people tried to run but found their feet would not move. Others wanted to shout, but their voices would not work. President Kim arrived with his security team and government officials. He walked toward the aliens with careful steps, trying to show no fear, even though his heart was beating so fast he thought it might burst. Dr. Park was among the scientists who followed the president. She carried recording equipment and tried to study the aliens, even though every instinct told her to run. She noticed that the beings seemed to be studying the humans as well, with expressions that might have been curiosity or contempt. We offer your species a choice, said Crix. His voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. Send your greatest warrior to face our weakest fighter in single combat. If your champion wins, we will leave your world in peace. If your champion loses, your species will serve the Volan Empire. The plaza became completely silent. Even the wind seemed to stop blowing. President Kim stepped forward and tried to keep his voice steady when he spoke. "What if we refuse your challenge, Ekrix?" Made a sound that might have been laughter but felt like ice in the minds of everyone who heard it. "Then we will take your world. By force, your cities will burn, your people will die. Billions will perish instead of just one." The president looked at his advisors and saw the same fear in their eyes that he felt in his heart. The aliens had traveled between stars. Their technology was beyond human understanding. If they wanted to destroy Earth, there was nothing humans could do to stop them. "What are the rules of this combat?" asked Dr. Park, stepping forward despite the danger. Crix turned his attention to her, and she felt like she was being examined by something vast and ancient. "Hand-to-hand combat, no weapons, no armor. Your fighter and ours in a circle until one cannot continue. How do we know you will keep your word if we win because honor matters to the Volan Empire? We do not lie about combat, but you will not win. Your species is soft and weak. Even our weakest warrior is stronger than your strongest human." One of the other aliens stepped forward. It was smaller than the others, but still much larger than any human. Its scales were a different shade of blue, and its eyes held something that might have been sadness. "This is Grax," said Crix with obvious disgust in his voice. "He has failed every test of strength, every trial of combat. Among our people, he is considered worthless. Yet, he would crush your mightiest warrior like an insect." President Kim looked at Grak and saw intelligence in those alien eyes. There was something different about this one, but he could not say what it was. "You have one rotation of your planet to decide," said Crix. "Choose your champion carefully, little humans. It will be the last choice your species makes as free beings, the aliens." Returned to their ship, leaving the humans alone in the plaza. The weight of the decision fell on everyone present. How could they choose someone to fight a being that could tear steel with its bare hands? Dr. Park watched the alien ship and wondered if there was something they were missing. The aliens spoke of strength and weakness, but maybe there were different kinds of strength. Maybe the key to winning was not what the aliens expected. The fate of humanity now rested on finding the right person to face an impossible challenge. Someone who could do what seemed impossible. Someone who could find a way to win against an enemy that seemed unbeatable. As the sun set over Seoul, the great ship hung in the sky like a dark promise. Tomorrow would bring either freedom or the end of human independence. The choice was theirs to make, but the consequences would affect every person on Earth. In the distance, thunder rolled across the sky, even though there were no clouds. It was as if the planet itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The morning sun cast long shadows across the plaza as thousands of people gathered to witness what might be the last free day of human civilization. Hyan stood at the edge of the crowd wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt while everyone around him was dressed in their finest clothes as if attending a funeral. The alien ship descended slowly until it hovered just above the government buildings. The same smaller craft that had arrived the day before separated from the main vessel and landed in the center of the plaza, with a thunderous crash that shook windows for blocks around. Hyan watched as the ramp extended and the aliens emerged. In daylight, they looked even more frightening than they had the day before. Their blue scales seemed to shift and change color as they moved, and their four arms moved independently like they were controlled by separate minds. Ambassador Crix walked forward with the same arrogant stride he had shown yesterday. Behind him came a group of Volan warriors, each one looking like they could tear through steel with their bare hands. But Hyan found his attention drawn to the figure walking at the back of the group. This alien was smaller than the others, but still much larger than any human. His scales were a different shade of blue, almost silver in the morning light. While the other aliens held their heads high and looked down at the humans with contempt, this one kept his gaze lowered as if he was ashamed to be there. "Behold," said Crix in that terrible voice that appeared directly in their minds. "Behold Grak, the weakest of our warriors. He has failed every test of combat. He has brought shame to our people. Among the Volan Empire, he is considered worthless." Grak stepped forward, and Hyan could see the intelligence in his large eyes. There was something different about this alien, something that set him apart from the others. While his companions looked at humans like they were insects, Grak seemed to be studying them with genuine curiosity. "This is your champion?" asked Crix, looking at Hyon with obvious amusement. "A soft little creature who appears to have never seen battle in his entire life. This is our representative," said President Kim, stepping forward with as much dignity as he could manage. Hyon walked toward the center of the plaza, where a large circle had been marked on the ground. The crowd fell silent as he approached. He could feel thousands of eyes watching him and the weight of their hopes and fears pressing down on his shoulders. He removed his glasses and handed them to Dr. Park, who was standing near the edge of the circle. Without them, the world became blurry, but he could still see Grak clearly as the alien warrior approached. The combat area was simple, just a circle marked in white paint on the concrete. No weapons were allowed, no armor, no technology. Just two beings facing each other with nothing but their natural abilities. Grak entered the circle and stood across from Hyon. Up close, the alien was even more impressive. His claws were as long as knives, and his muscles moved beneath his scales like steel cables. One swipe of those claws could end the fight instantly. "Any last words, little human?" asked Grak in surprisingly clear English. Hyon was startled to hear the alien speak in his language. The voice was deep and resonant, but there was something musical about it that reminded him of singing. "Yes," said Hyon, looking directly into Grak's eyes. "Why do you fight for people who call you worthless?" The question seemed to hit Grak like a physical blow. His eyes widened, and he took a step backward. In all his years of combat, no opponent had ever asked him about his feelings or his place in society, "because," said Grak slowly, as if he was trying to understand the question himself, "because it is what I was born to do." "That is not an answer," said Hyon. "That is an excuse." The watching Volans began to hiss and snarl at what they saw as disrespect toward their warrior. But Grak seemed frozen in place, as if he had never considered the possibility that there might be other ways to live. "You are different from the others," said Grak, tilting his head in a gesture that was almost human. "So are you," said Hyon. "I can see it in your eyes." The crowd around them began to murmur with confusion. This was not how combat was supposed to begin. There should be circling and posturing and displays of strength. Instead, the two fighters were having a conversation. "What do you mean I am different?" asked Grak. "You do not look at us the way the others do," said Hyon. "They see enemies to be conquered. You see individuals to be understood." Grak glanced back at his fellow Volans and then returned his attention to Hyon. "Among my people, understanding is considered weakness. Only strength matters. Only victory has value. But you do not believe that, do you?" said Hyon, taking a step closer. "I," said Grak, and then stopped. His claws retracted slightly and his aggressive posture relaxed. "I have never been asked what I believe." The other Volans were becoming agitated. They had expected a quick, violent end to this challenge. Instead, their weakest warrior was engaged in philosophical discussion with a human who showed no fear. Ambassador Crix stepped forward, his voice cutting through the morning air like a blade. "Begin the combat. Kill this creature and be done with it." But Grak did not move. He continued to stare at Hyon as if seeing him for the first time. "What are you doing?" he asked. "I am trying to understand you," said Hyon, "just like you are trying to understand me." "This is not combat," said Grak, sounding confused. "No," said Hyon. "This is conversation. This is two intelligent beings trying to find common ground." "Common ground," repeated Grak, as if the words were foreign to him. "You said your people value only strength and victory," said Hyon. "But what do you value?" Grak was quiet for a long moment. The entire plaza held its breath, waiting for his answer. When he spoke, his voice was so soft that only Hyon could hear him. "I value beauty," he said. "I value the sound of wind through crystal formations on my homeworld. I value the way sunlight looks when it passes through our purple atmosphere. I value words that describe feelings that have no names in any language. Those are not weaknesses," said Hyon. "Those are gifts." "My people would not agree," said Grak. "Your people are not here," said Hyon. "Only you and I are here. Only we get to decide what happens next." Around them, the crowd was growing restless. The humans feared their champion had lost his mind. The Volans demanded action and violence. But in the center of the circle, two beings who should have been enemies were discovering that they understood each other in ways that surprised them both. "What happens now?" asked Grak. "Now," said Hyan, "you show me who you really are. Not the warrior they think you should be. Not the failure they say you are. Show me the real Grak." For the first time in his life, Grak felt like someone was actually listening to him. Someone who did not judge him by the standards of his warrior culture. Someone who saw value in the things he had always been told were worthless. The battle was about to begin, but neither fighter was thinking about combat anymore. They were thinking about understanding and connection and the possibility that there might be better ways to resolve conflict than violence. The fate of Earth hung in the balance, but the outcome would not be decided by strength or speed or fighting skill. It would be decided by something much more powerful than any weapon. It would be decided by the courage to see past differences and find the common ground that connected all intelligent beings. Li Haiyan was stocking shelves at the convenience store when the world changed forever. He worked the night shift at a small shop in Gangnam District and spent most of his time reading science fiction books between customers. At 25 years old, he was perfectly ordinary in every way possible. He was not tall or short, just average height. He was not strong or weak, just normal. He wore thick glasses because his eyes were bad, and he had never been in a real fight in his entire life. When conflicts happened, he preferred to talk his way out of trouble or simply walk away. The emergency broadcasts had been playing all day, but Hyan thought it was some kind of joke or movie promotion. Aliens landing in Seoul sounded like something from the books he read, not something that could actually happen in real life. He was arranging snacks on the shelf when three people in black suits entered his store. They looked very serious and official, like government agents from a movie. The woman leading them was tall with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything at once. "Are you Li Haiyan?" she asked, showing him an official-looking badge. "Yes." Hyan replied, wondering if he was in trouble for something. "Did I do something wrong? You need to come with us immediately," said the woman. "My name is Agent Jung, and this is a matter of national security." Hyan looked around his small store with confusion. He had never done anything important in his life. He paid his taxes and followed the rules and minded his own business. What could the government possibly want with him? "I think you have the wrong person," he said. "I just work at a convenience store." Agent Jung pulled out a tablet and showed him a screen full of data and charts. "Your name came up in our analysis. We need ordinary citizens for a very important mission." "What kind of mission?" asked Hyan, but he was already afraid of the answer, the kind that determines whether humanity survives or becomes enslaved by alien conquerors. Hyan stared at her for a long moment, thinking this must be some kind of elaborate prank. But the serious expressions on their faces told him it was real. The impossible was actually happening. They brought him to a government building where scientists and military officers filled every room. Dr. Park was there along with President Kim and dozens of other important-looking people. They all turned to stare at Hyan when he entered, and he felt very small and out of place. "This is him?" asked President Kim, looking doubtful. Agent Jung nodded. Li Haiyan, age 25, works night shift at a convenience store in Gangnam. No military training, no combat experience, no special skills. He is statistically the most average person we could find in Seoul. "I still do not understand why you want me," said Hyan, sitting in a chair that seemed too big for him. Dr. Park stepped forward with a kind smile. "The aliens challenged us to send our greatest warrior to fight their weakest fighter. But we think they are expecting us to send someone strong and skilled. So you want to send someone weak instead?" asked Hyan. "Not weak," said Dr. Park. "Different. The aliens value physical strength and combat ability above everything else. Their weakest fighter will still be incredibly powerful by their standards, but what if their weakness is not physical?" said Agent Jung. "What if it is something else entirely?" Hyan looked around the room at all the important people depending on him. He thought about his little sister Yuna, who worked as a nurse at the hospital. She had always been the brave one in their family. He thought about his parents, who ran a small restaurant and worked hard every day to make customers happy. "What happens if I say no?" he asked. "Then we find someone else," said President Kim. "But our analysis shows you are the best choice we have, And if I lose then we all lose together, said Agent Jung softly. Hyon spent the night walking through the empty streets of Seoul. The alien ship hung in the sky like a dark cloud, blocking out the stars. He could see lights moving across its surface and wondered what the beings inside were thinking about. Humans, he had always felt invisible in the world. People looked through him like he was not there. Teachers forgot his name. Customers barely noticed him. He had never done anything that mattered to anyone, but now the whole world was asking him to do something that could save everyone or doom them all. He walked past the hospital where his sister worked. The building was full of lights as doctors and nurses took care of people who were scared about what might happen tomorrow. He walked past his parents' restaurant, which was closed, but he could see them inside cleaning and preparing for another day of serving food to their community. These were the people he would be fighting for? Not just his family, but everyone who lived quiet, ordinary lives. Everyone who worked hard and cared about others and tried to make the world a little better in small ways. By the time the sun rose, Han had made his decision. He returned to the government building where Agent Jung was waiting with coffee and worried expressions. I will do it, he said simply. Are you sure? Asked Dr. Park. No, said Han. I am terrified and I have no idea what I am doing. But someone has to try, and you think I'm the best choice. Agent Jung smiled for the first time since he had met her. You are braver than you know. I am not brave, said Hyon. I am just ordinary. But maybe that is what we need right now. They spent the morning preparing him for what was to come. There was no training they could give him that would make him strong enough to fight an alien warrior. Instead, they talked about strategy and psychology and ways to win without violence. Dr. Park showed him everything they had learned about the aliens. The Volans were a warrior culture that respected only strength and combat ability. They conquered worlds and enslaved weaker species. Their society was built on the idea that might makes right, but even in their culture there were those who did not fit. Those who were considered weak or different. Those who were outcasts in their own society. Maybe that is the key, said Dr. Park. Maybe. Their weakest fighter is weak for reasons that have nothing to do with physical strength. Hyon nodded, understanding what she meant. He had always been different too. He had never fit in with others who valued strength and aggression. Maybe that difference was exactly what was needed. As the time for the challenge approached, Hyon felt his fear growing. But alongside the fear was something else, a strange sense of purpose. For the first time in his life, he was going to do something that truly mattered. He put on simple clothes and walked toward the plaza where thousands of people were gathering. The alien ship was descending, and soon he would face a being that could tear him apart with its bare hands. But he was not going to fight the way the aliens expected. He was going to be himself and hope that being ordinary was enough to save the world. The signal to begin combat echoed across the plaza like thunder. Grak immediately charged forward with his massive claws extended and his powerful legs carrying him across the circle in seconds. Every human in the crowd expected to see their champion torn apart in an instant, but Hyon did something that no one could have predicted. Instead of running or fighting or trying to defend himself, he simply sat down cross-legged in the center of the circle. Grak skidded to a halt, just inches away from the small human. His claws were raised and ready to strike, but he found himself unable to complete the attack. The human sat peacefully with his eyes closed as if he was meditating. What are you doing? Asked Grak, his voice filled with confusion. Thinking, said Han without opening his eyes. You could kill me right now. One swipe of those claws and the fight would be over. But you stopped. I want to understand why. The crowd around them erupted in chaos. The humans shouted for their champion to get up and fight. The Volans roared for their warrior to finish what he had started. But neither fighter moved. I do not understand, said Grak, lowering his claws slightly. Neither do I, said Han, opening his eyes and looking up at the massive alien. I do not understand why intelligent beings travel across the galaxy just to hurt others. I do not understand why your people call you weak when you are clearly powerful. And I do not understand why you let them. Grak took a step backward. No one had ever spoken to him this way. No one had ever asked him to think about his own worth or his place in the universe. You are trying to confuse me, said Grak, but his voice lacked conviction. No, said Heian, standing up slowly with his hands open and empty. I am trying to understand you. Tell me about your homeworld. What is it like? Grak glanced around the circle at the watching crowds. The other Volans were hissing their displeasure, but something in their weakest warrior's posture made them hesitate. To intervene, it is, said Grak, and then paused as if he had never been asked this question before. It is beautiful. We have crystal mountains that sing when the wind passes through them. We have oceans that glow with tiny creatures that light up the night. We have forests of trees that grow in spirals toward our twin suns. That sounds wonderful, said Heian. You must miss it. I do, said Grak, surprised by his own honesty. But there is no place for those who appreciate beauty instead of seeking conquest. There is no place for those who would rather create than destroy. That sounds lonely, said Heian. It is, said Grak, and the admission seemed to surprise him. I have always been alone among my own people. The watching crowds were becoming more agitated. This was not the combat they had expected. There was no violence, no dramatic displays of strength, no clear winner or loser. What if I told you there was another way, asked Heian, taking another step closer to the alien warrior. What do you mean, asked Grak. What if strength was not just about how hard you could hit or how many enemies you could defeat? What if there were other kinds of strength that your people have never considered? Grak tilted his head in that almost human gesture. What other kinds of strength? The strength to be different, said Heian. The strength to value beauty in a culture that only values war. The strength to ask questions instead of just following orders. Those are not strength, said Grak. Those are the things that make me a failure, according to who asked Heian. According to people who have never tried to understand the universe the way you do. Ambassador Crix could no longer contain his anger. He stepped toward the combat circle with his own claws extended. Enough of this nonsense. Kill the human or we will kill you both. But Grak surprised everyone by turning to face his ambassador. No, he said in a voice that carried across the entire plaza. What did you say? Demanded Crix. I said no, repeated Grak more firmly. I will not kill someone who sees value in me. I will not fight for people who call me worthless when there are others who understand what I truly am. The other Volan warriors began to move toward their weapons, but Grak stepped protectively in front of Heian for the first time in his life. He was defending something that mattered to him. You are weak, said Crix with disgust. You are a disgrace to our people. Maybe, said Grak, but I am tired of being ashamed of who I am. Heian felt a surge of hope. This was exactly what he had been hoping for. He had not tried to defeat Grak in combat. Instead, he had tried to help Grak defeat the voices in his own mind that told him he was worthless. Show me your greatest weakness, said Heian. I will show you mine. Grak looked at him with surprise. My greatest weakness? The thing you are most ashamed of, said Heian. The thing your people would mock you for if they knew. Grak was quiet for a long moment. Then he began to speak in a voice that was different from before, more musical, more expressive. I write poetry, he said so quietly that only Heian could hear. In my language we have words for emotions that your language cannot express. We have words for the loneliness of being different. We have words for the beauty of things that others cannot see. Then he began to recite something in his own language. The words flowed like music, and even though none of the humans understood the meaning, they could feel the emotion behind them. It was beautiful and sad and hopeful all at the same time. When he finished, Grak looked ashamed. Now you know my weakness, he said. That is not weakness, said Heian firmly. That is one of the most beautiful things I have ever heard. My people would laugh at me if they knew, said Grak. Your people are afraid of anything they do not understand, said Heian, but understanding is not weakness. Sensitivity is not failure. The ability to see beauty in the world is a gift. Grak stared at this small human who had somehow seen past his physical appearance to the person he really was underneath. No one had ever called his poetry a gift before. No one had ever treated his differences as something valuable. Now let me show you my weakness, said Heian. I am terrified right now. I'm afraid of disappointing everyone who is depending on me. I'm afraid of being ordinary in a world that values only extraordinary expo, but you are here, said Grak. You are facing me even though you know I could kill you easily. I am here. Because sometimes being ordinary is exactly what the world needs, said Hyan. Sometimes the most extraordinary thing you can do is help someone else discover their own worth. Around them, the crowds were growing more confused and agitated. The Volans wanted violence. The humans wanted victory. But in the center of the circle, something more important was happening. Two beings who should have been enemies were discovering that they were not so different after all. They were both outcasts in their own societies. They were both struggling to find their place in the universe. They were both looking for someone who would accept them for who they truly were. The battle was not over, but it was no longer about combat. It was about connection and understanding and the courage to be different in a world that demanded conformity. What happens now? Asked Grak. Now, said Hayoung, we show everyone watching that there are better ways to resolve conflict than violence. We show them that strength comes in many forms and that understanding can be more powerful than any weapon. The fate of Earth still hung in the balance, but the outcome would not be decided by who was physically stronger. It would be decided by who had the courage to choose a different path. The plaza had become a battlefield of words and ideas rather than claws and violence. Grak stood facing his own people with Hyan beside him, and for the first time in his life he felt like he belonged somewhere. Ambassador Crix was furious beyond measure. His carefully planned conquest was falling apart, because their weakest warrior had found something more important than victory. The other Volan warriors looked confused and uncertain, as if the foundation of their entire worldview was cracking. You have lost your mind, said Crix, advancing toward the circle with his claws fully extended. This creature has poisoned your thoughts with weakness. No, said Grak, stepping forward to meet his ambassador. He has shown me that what you call weakness might actually be strength that you are too afraid to understand. The watching humans held their breath. They could see that their champion had somehow managed to turn the alien warrior into an ally, but they did not know if it would be enough to save them from the others. Hyan watched the confrontation with growing amazement. He had hoped to find some way to avoid violence, but he had not expected to actually convert his opponent. Grak was now defending him against his own people, and the change was remarkable to see. You are no longer Volan, said Crix with disgust. You are contaminated by human weakness. If caring about beauty is weakness, then I accept that label, said Grak. If valuing understanding over conquest is contamination, then I welcome it. The other Volan warriors began to move closer, but they seemed uncertain about what to do. Their training told them to attack, but their cultural programming said that combat decisions belonged to the designated fighters. Then Grak did something that shocked everyone present. He began to speak to his fellow Volans in their own language, but loud enough for all to hear. His words had the same musical quality as his poetry, and even though the humans could not understand the meaning, they could feel the power behind them. Park was recording everything on her equipment. Later she would discover that Grak was not just speaking to his warriors. He was reciting poetry that described what it felt like to be different in a culture that demanded conformity. He spoke about the loneliness of being the only one who saw beauty in a world obsessed with destruction. He spoke about the pain of being called weak when you were actually strong in ways that others could not measure. He spoke about the courage it took to be yourself, when everyone around you wanted you to be someone else. As he spoke, something extraordinary began to happen. Some of the other Volan warriors began to lower their weapons. Their faces showed expressions that their people rarely displayed: uncertainty, doubt, and something that might have been recognition. What is he saying? Asked President Kim. He is telling them that they do not have to live the way they have always lived, said Hyan. He is telling them that there are other ways to be strong. One of the younger Volan warriors stepped forward. His scales were a darker blue than the others, and he moved with less confidence. When he spoke, his voice was hesitant but clear. I too have felt these things, he said in broken English. I too have wondered if there were other ways to live. Crix spun around to face the young warrior. Silence. You will not speak such treasonous thoughts. But the young Volan continued. I have seen worlds where beings live in peace. I have wondered what it would be like to create instead of destroy. I have wondered if we could find strength in building rather than tearing down. More warriors began to step forward. Not all of them, but enough to make Crix realize that his authority was crumbling. The ideas that Grak and Hyon were spreading were taking root in minds that had been trained never to question their way of life. This is madness, said Crix. You are warriors of the Volan Empire. You do not question. You do not doubt. You conquer. Maybe that is the problem, said another warrior. Maybe we have forgotten that there are other ways to be strong. Hin Yun watched in amazement as the alien force began to divide itself. Some warriors still stood with Crix ready to fight and conquer as they had always done, but others were beginning to consider the possibility that their culture had been wrong about what truly mattered. Grak continued speaking to his people, but now his voice carried more confidence. He was no longer the weakest warrior ashamed of his differences. He was a leader offering his people a new way to understand themselves and their place in the universe. The humans in the crowd began to understand what was happening. Their champion had not defeated the alien warrior in combat. Instead, he had helped the warrior defeat the limitations that his own culture had placed on him. Dr. Park stepped forward with her recording equipment. She had an idea that might help tip the balance even further. May I ask you something, she said to Grak. Of course, said Grak, turning to face her. You said you write poetry about your homeworld. Would you be willing to share some of that poetry with us? We would like to understand your people better. Grak looked surprised by the request. You want to hear my poetry? We want to understand what your world is really like, said Dr. Park. Not the version your leaders show us, but the version that someone who sees beauty would describe. Grak began to recite again, but this time he translated his words into English as he spoke. He described crystal mountains that sang harmonies when the wind passed through them. He described oceans that glowed with bioluminescent creatures that danced in patterns too complex for any mind to fully comprehend. He described forests where trees grew in spirals toward twin suns and their leaves changed color with the music of the wind. He described cities built from materials that were both strong and beautiful, where art and science worked together to create wonders that served both practical and aesthetic purposes. As he spoke, the listening humans began to understand something important. The Volan Empire was not just a collection of warriors and conquerors. It was a civilization with its own beauty and complexity and depth, but they had forgotten that beauty in their pursuit of power and conquest. They had lost touch with the things that made them more than just sophisticated predators. Your world sounds incredible, said Hyon. Why would you want to leave it to conquer others? Because we were taught that conquest was the only way to be strong, said Grak. Because we were told that those who appreciated beauty were weak and useless. But you are not weak, said Hyon. You are strong enough to stand up to your own people. You are strong enough to be different. You are strong enough to choose a better path. The division among the Volan warriors was becoming more pronounced. About half of them had lowered their weapons and were listening to the conversation with growing interest. The other half remained loyal to Crix, but their certainty was wavering. This ends now, said Crix, raising his own weapons. If you will not fight, then I will kill both of you myself. But as he moved toward the circle, something unexpected happened. The young warrior who had spoken first stepped between Crix and the others. No, he said firmly. I will not let you harm those who are trying to find a better way. Then you are a traitor, said Crix. Then I am a traitor, said the young warrior. But I am a traitor to ideas that I no longer believe in. More warriors joined him, creating a barrier between Crix and his targets. The ambassador found himself facing not just human resistance but rebellion within his own ranks. The tide had turned not through violence but through the power of ideas and the courage to question what they had always been told was true. The battle for Earth was not over, but it was no longer a battle between humans and aliens. It had become a battle between those who believed in the old ways and those who were ready to embrace something new. The plaza had become a stage for the most important moment in human history. Two very different groups of beings stood, facing each other not as enemies but as representatives of two different ways of understanding the universe. On one side stood Ambassador Crix with about half of his warriors. They represented the old way of thinking where strength meant the ability to dominate others, and where conquest was the only path to security and respect. On the other side stood Grak with his newfound allies, both Volan and human. They represented something new and uncertain but filled with possibility. They believed that strength could come from understanding, and that security could be found in cooperation rather than domination. Hyan found himself at the center of it. Oh, the ordinary convenience store worker who had somehow become the catalyst for a revolution that could change the fate of multiple worlds. "You cannot defeat us all," said Crix, but his voice lacked the confidence it had carried before. Too many of his own people had turned away from him, and he was no longer sure of his position. "We do not need to defeat you," said Hyan, stepping forward. "We just need to show you that there are other ways to live." He gestured to the crowd around them, humans and Volans standing together not in conquest but in understanding. "Look at what we have accomplished without violence. Look at what becomes possible when we choose cooperation over conflict." Grak moved to stand beside Hyan. His posture was different now. He no longer carried himself like a failed warrior ashamed of his differences. He stood like someone who had finally found his place in the universe. "My people," he said, addressing both groups. "We have traveled the galaxy seeking strength through conquest. We have taken worlds and enslaved species because we believed that was the only way to prove our worth. But look what we have found here. A species that showed us strength we never knew existed, the strength to see value in those who are different, the strength to choose understanding over violence, the strength to help others discover their own worth." The young Volan warrior, who had been the first to join them, stepped forward. His name was Vek, and he had spent years questioning the path his people had chosen. "I have seen the worlds we have conquered," he said. "I have seen the fear in the eyes of those we have enslaved. I have wondered if there was another way, but I was afraid to speak my doubts." More warriors began to share their own stories. They spoke of doubts they had harbored for years. They spoke of wondering if their culture had lost its way. They spoke of longing for something more meaningful than endless conquest. The Arpark was recording everything. She knew that this moment would be studied for generations to come. The day when two species learned that they had more in common than they had differences. President Kim stepped forward with tears in his eyes. He had expected this day to end in either victory or defeat for humanity. Instead, it was ending with something far more valuable. It was ending with the beginning of true understanding between worlds. Ambassador Crix looked around at his divided forces. Many of his warriors had laid down their weapons. Others stood uncertain, no longer sure which side they should support. "This is not over," he said, but his threat rang hollow. "You may have corrupted some of my warriors, but the Empire will not accept this weakness." "Then the Empire will have to change," said Grak, "or it will be left behind as the galaxy moves toward something better." "What happens now?" asked Hyan. "Do we fight, or do we find a way to move forward together?" Crix looked at the faces around him. He saw humans who had shown mercy to those who had threatened them. He saw his own people discovering strength they never knew they possessed. He saw the possibility of a future very different from the one he had planned. Slowly he lowered his weapons. "I do not understand what has happened here," he said. "But I can see that something has changed that cannot be unchanged." The crowd erupted in cheers. Humans and Volans embraced each other. The threat of conquest had been replaced by the promise of cooperation. But the real victory was quieter and more personal. Hyan found himself surrounded by beings who had learned